on all SMB traffic. That'll hit both of those protocols. And it's something that you can either specify, don't require anything, negotiate signing, or require signing. We all love require signing. Question up front.
I think that implies a fair bit of overhead, which is why it's not on by default.
Okay. The response was it does require a fair bit of overhead. And so if you do have performance problems, then you might have to leave that off. But certainly if it's an untrusted network, and we want to make sure that those replay attacks are not possible, you want to turn that on. So if you have a completely trustworthy network and low performance, you might want to leave it off like anything else. But if it's a non-trustworthy network, which is the kind of network we tend to use authentication protocols on, you probably want to turn that sucker on. Is that a fair response? Okay. HTTPS. Now this is a new one with Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008 R2. You can get integrated Windows authentication using HTTP, but there's no packet privacy setting that you can specify for an HTTP connection. This is because it's a very widely interoperable type of protocol. So what they've introduced in the latest versions of Windows is what's called a channel binding token. It's under the feature called extended protection, and you can go and look up more guidance on that. But briefly, what happens is when you're using integrated Windows authentication over a SSL connection that's using the HTTP protocol, the client will emit a token that indicates to the server, hey, I'm trying to use SSL and I'm trying to talk to this server. Would you please make sure when you receive this packet that nobody messed with that you didn't see something that people were intending to use for HTTP or a different server. The server also has to be configured to check for that token and do that specific step I just suggested. Now, unfortunately, this feature is disabled by default. You have to go and change a couple registry keys on the client side in order to emit that token, and then you also have to configure your IIS server to check for that token. So most of the administrator side, devs, it pretty much comes for free. However, if you are doing something a little bit off the beaten path, you should look up some documentation for what you can do, specifically with .NET clients. So we've gone through authenticating properly, making sure we don't have bad crypto, making sure that our PK init deployment is nice and happy. And then we went through, okay, now we just rewrite all the services in the world and configure our machines properly to actually use that session key that Kerberos negotiates. Now, thankfully, are we finally done? Now, one of the benefits of Kerberos is true mutual authentication. That if I want to talk to Brad, between all that stuff we just talked about, especially that AP-REC and AP-REP, I can make sure that I have a session key shared with Brad. Now, what happens if I'm using a big, huge, large-scale, self-organizing system? How do I determine that Brad is the person I want to talk to? I can do a couple of things, but maybe we'll just start with a few things maybe you shouldn't do. So one idea is ask the attacker what their SPN is. If I type in, I would like to connect to 192.168.0.2, how do I find out what their SPN is? To go to the Kerberos DC or the KDC to find out what the SPN that I should be using to get a key to that one is? Well, I could just ask the attacker, please tell me, who are you really? Another idea, maybe, Brad?
Well, instead of rolling your own way to ask the attacker, you could use a standard API like RPC management inquire server principal name and ask the man in the middle over documented, standardized interfaces what identity they would like you to use.
It's very helpful. Rachel?
Oh, you could check the DNS SRV record. DNS is totally secure.
Yeah, that's another good idea. Just ask out into the ether, hello, who is my LDAP server, please? Another one is you can pull the attacker's SPN out of a service definition defined by the attacker. If we're using the promise of service-oriented architecture and just have a self-organizing beast of systems and we have all these WSDL documents going around, when we pull down that WSDL document, we're probably pulling it from an attacker and we're looking at the SPN within that document. Next one, Brad.
You could also just pretend that this doesn't happen and not set an SPN at all or set one that's incorrect. And if you're very lucky, your service will default to something somewhat sensible, but you're not sure. More likely, you're going to not use Kerberos at all. You think you will, but you'll get NTLM or you'll get a null session, and you won't have any indication that that's happened.
So unfortunately, the list of things not to do is much easier to create than the list of things to do. It's a surprisingly widespread problem because if I'm just talking to Brad, that's pretty easy to figure out who I'm talking to and to type it into my, my little login prompt or whatever else. But if I have 100,000 machines, all of which are going to be service-oriented perhaps, or maybe configured for ease of deployment so that they go and resolve who they're supposed to be talking to and authenticating with, then there is no standard recommendation for what to do. You could write down on every service or every endpoint the 10 principals you're supposed to be configured to talk to, but that's error prone and it doesn't scale. The best argument I can give is you have to make sure you have secure service resolution, that if you are going to be doing runtime mapping of what your SPN is, that you do that through some bootstrapped authentication to maybe a service resolution server, and then you use that to find out, okay, I know who you are. You are myhappyserver.isecpartners.com. Please tell me, who should I be talking to for LDAP? So you want to do that over a secure channel, and a lot of times when I've had to run into those things, when we've had to run into those things before, it's a deployment and application specific sort of thing. So if you have questions, please do ask us directly. So thank you all for coming. This was a very high and fast presentation. There's a lot more content. If you have questions about your specific use of Kerberos, please do feel free to email us. And as we continue to do research in this area, we'll be posting more updates. And so check us out at isecpartners.com. Thank you for coming.